not a campaign. It's a billion-dollar criminal enterprise. Donald Trump says he's running on law and order.
I am the law and order candidate.
Who's he kidding? Trump's campaign manager is a felon. His deputy campaign manager is a felon. His national security advisor, a felon. His foreign policy advisor is a felon. His personal lawyer is a felon. His longtime personal advisor, a felon. Nixon was bad. Trump is worse. Now, Trump saves Roger Stone. Stone lied to cover up Russian involvement in Trump's campaign to protect Donald Trump. 7 felony convictions.
I am the law and order candidate. Trump
is the most corrupt president in U.S. history. There's only one way to end the Trump crime spree. Throw him and his crooks out of office. On November 3rd, vote for justice. The Lincoln Project is responsible for the content of this advertising.
When you were elected, you promised to drain the swamp. Now, as millions of hardworking Americans suffer from sickness and job loss, the only people you continue to bail out are your criminal friends.
The Attorney General told federal prosecutors to drop their case against Michael Flynn.
President Trump has told Roger Stone that he will commute his sentence.
The most indictments of any administration in history. You didn't drain the swamp. You are the swamp. And you think you deserve 4 more years? Pardon me? Midas Touch is responsible for the content of this advertising.
Roger Stone lied under oath to protect his longtime friend, Donald Trump. He was found guilty by a jury of his peers and sentenced to 3 years in prison. And Donald Trump gave him a get-out-of-jail-free card.
The president will commute his sentence.
In Donald Trump's America, a criminal who lies to protect Trump goes free. A war hero who testifies truthfully about Trump's conduct gets fired and smeared. This is Trump's law and order. This is Trump's banana republic. This is Trump's America.
said, you understand, I have the option, I have the authority to either grant a pardon or commute your sentence. He says you should understand that a pardon would be final, and that in accepting a pardon, you are exceptionally accepting guilt. And I would rather see you fight this out, which is why I'm commuting your sentence.
Again, Frank, it's shades of Tessio. Isn't there something you can do for old time's sake? This is Roger Stone, who gave an interview today saying he didn't turn on the boss. He could have, but he didn't. That sure indicates he had damaging material on the boss. Frank, please remind us why Roger Stone was convicted.
Yeah, lest anyone feel any sympathy for this man, let's just spend a minute recapping what he was convicted of and why the president had commuted his sentence. Roger Stone tried to subvert, undermine our presidential election system, and he did so in concert with two foreign entities. Namely, there's evidence indicating that he was the intermediary between the Russian intelligence hacking unit known as Guccifer and the WikiLeaks organization. And I'll point to federal court testimony by Rick Gates, the former deputy chairman of the Trump 2016 campaign, who said in court, I was riding in a Chevy Suburban with Trump to LaGuardia Airport. Trump took a call from Roger Stone. They appeared to talk about WikiLeaks and the release of the hacked material from the DNC. When Trump ended the call, he turned to Gates and said, they're going to release more information. This is why Trump had to commute Roger Stone. Roger Stone can put Donald Trump in federal prison for lying. Lying when? lying in his written responses to the special counsel when the president told Robert Mueller, I never heard anything about Roger Stone talking to anybody about timing or the release of the hacked DNC and Clinton materials. That was a lie. And tonight, Trump is going to hit the pillow in the White House and have to wonder that if Roger Stone has one bad day and decides to dime out the president, Trump could end his presidency and eventually go to prison. I think there's a sense of shame and disgrace among the career professionals, both at the Hoover Building and across the street at Main Justice. They know they are being led by an attorney general who has an ulterior motive, and that is to essentially undermine our rule of law and the Constitution in support of some bizarre philosophical agenda that he has in concert with the president. This will go down in history as a time period where justice was actually beaten to the point of almost dying. And we're gonna look back and study this era. Roger Stone was somebody who threatened a key witness who knew what Roger was up to with regard to undermining the election process. He said to that witness, prepare to die, in the context of if you testify against me. He was convicted of all seven counts he was charged with. He was sentenced to 40 months in prison, including for witness tampering, obstructing Congress, lying to investigators, and yet today, the president has given him a pass. That's who Roger Stone is, and that's who our president is.
You might remember that at Stone's trial last year, former Trump's chief strategist Steve Bannon called him an access point to WikiLeaks before the site's publication of Hillary Clinton's hacked emails. Stone, at one point a close advisor to businessman Donald Trump, was set to surrender begin his prison sentence on Tuesday. Now, Roger Stone, if he's anything, he's a convicted felon. He's also a lifelong Republican henchman. I mean, this is a guy who is in many ways the face of the Republican Party. He's got a tattoo of Richard Nixon on his back. Roger Stone isn't some aberrant Trump-era figure. He has been entwined in the Republican Party for decades. And that shows you what the Republican Party that we currently have is all about. It is the party of Roger Stone and Donald Trump. You know, the United States has the worst coronavirus response in the world. Right now, we have the most cases, over 3 million, and the most deaths, more than 130,000. And that's not just because we currently have one of the worst presidents in our country's history who doesn't seem to care about containing the virus, but also because we have one of the worst political parties in power in the entire democratic world. The Republican Party, the party of Roger Stone and Donald Trump, by a bunch of metrics, is off on an island all its own. It is further right than the vast majority of conservative parties in Western Europe and Canada. It is further right than parties considered to be extreme in Europe. For example, for years, it has been the lone major conservative party across the democratic world to deny the science of climate change. But now, on this evening in which the president has pardoned his criminal associate, now all of the Republican Party's most dangerous pathologies have come to fruition with Donald Trump amidst this pandemic. Because it's not just Donald Trump. It is a mistake to put it solely on Donald Trump. Look at what the entire party from top to bottom is doing during this crisis. Now, to be clear, it is a very difficult problem. We say that every night. It's a difficult governing problem for everyone. And there have been many Democratic officials who have made truly massive mistakes. Mayor Bill de Blasio, a Democrat, waited too long to close down New York City, and it cost lives. New York Governor Andrew Cuomo made a fatefully terrible decision to send coronavirus patients to nursing homes. And there have been Republicans who've done a pretty good job. Massachusetts Governor Charlie Baker, Ohio Governor Mike DeWine. But on the whole, as an entity, the Republican Party, the party of Roger Stone and Donald Trump, is an irredeemable disaster. Look at their governors. In Arizona, Governor Doug Ducey originally blocked local officials from mandating masks. He was accused of manipulating the data in his state to reopen the state too quickly, and now Arizona has one of the worst outbreaks in the country. The governor's getting called out in the front page of the local newspaper for his lack of action. In Texas, Governor Greg Abbott did much of the same thing. He said local officials could not punish people for not wearing masks, and he rushed to reopen. And now Texas is dealing with a massive outbreak, and Governor Abbott is taking the heat. In Mississippi, Governor Tate Reeves has been reluctant to put a statewide mask ordinance in place, and now his state is dealing with a mess. Their health system is overburdened, and Governor Reeves finally just ordered a mask mandate after about a sixth of the state's legislators contracted the virus because the heavily Republican body insisted on working in person at the Capitol without masks in that kind of proximity. That's just a small portion of what's going on in states run by Republicans. And while the country is in the midst of a once-in-a-century calamity, affecting everything from public health, the economy, to the social fabric of the nation, the Republican senators representing their constituents in Washington are pretending like they're full-time tweeters or right-wing talk radio hosts or some dude somewhere with a cool new podcast, or just actively working to make life harder for people and make things easier for the virus. In the state of Missouri, where they set a record for new cases just now and just had a huge coronavirus outbreak at a summer camp, you may wonder what the new young senator from that state who is a rising star in the party is up to amidst this once-in-a-century calamity. I'll tell you, he's fighting with the NBA, sending a strongly worded letter to Commissioner Adam Silver about how they're kowtowing to China with new rules about player jerseys. Senator Josh Hawley also took the time today to blow up an ESPN reporter who sent him a rude email in response to that letter. In Texas, a state that has hit a record with coronavirus deaths, topping 3,000, Texas Senator Ted Cruz, the darling of the conservative movement who wants to be president someday, he's busy hosting his own podcast, tweeting about Goya Foods, and fighting with a Harvard law professor on Twitter because he didn't like the way he talked about White House Press Secretary Kayleigh McEnany. All the while, his constituents right now are dying in their homes in record numbers because the ambulances can't get to them fast enough. And then there's his fellow Texan Congressman Dan Crenshaw, also a new young rising star on the right. A month ago, he was tone policing people who were warning about the virus, complaining about fear-mongering from a local county official who was warning about the coming disaster as the virus spread. The congressman said, "We have enormous hospital capacity. We can do this." That's what's happening in their state. That's how Republicans in that state are reacting. And then there's Senator Chuck Grassley, widely seen as a kind of Republican elder statesman. The octogenarian is wisely planning to skip the in-person COVID party Donald Trump is still planning to throw in Jacksonville, Florida next month. But yesterday, he was whining about the Big Ten's decision to move to a conference-only model for all fall sports to limit traveling and packing thousands of people into stadiums. And as all this is happening, the president and this party continue their insane fight against masks at the grassroots and cultural level. It sees the whole party and political movement. It's maybe the biggest impediment right now to American public health and also to Donald Trump's re-election fortunes. Like last week when Texas Governor Greg Abbott finally did an about-face because it got so bad in Texas. It is so bad in Texas. He told Texans they have to put a piece of cloth over their face. They have to wear masks in a last desperate attempt to save the state's economy and hospital system, and most importantly, save Texan lives. Well, now Greg Abbott is dealing with a full-fledged revolt from the grassroots of the Texas Republican Party, as county after county parties pass formal censure resolutions condemning the governor's response to the pandemic. That's the same Texas Republican Party, you may remember, that until the mayor canceled it earlier this week was insisting on holding their own in-person convention with 6,000 people in Houston later this summer. They wanted to throw a COVID party in Houston in the midst of the worst outbreak the city has seen. This is the Republican Party, the party of Donald Trump and Ted Cruz and Josh Hawley and Roger Stone. This party is intellectually bankrupt. It is entirely unable to meet the moment. It has now given us, let's be clear, 2 successive presidencies that have brought the country to its knees. It is so corroded, so desiccated, so dangerous, it will revolt against one of its own members when they do something right to fight the plague to save lives. It is becoming a pro-COVID party before our eyes. And remember, it is more than Donald Trump. It's the entire party.
Someday soon, the time of Trump will pass. This circus of incompetence, corruption, and cruelty will end. When it does, the men and women in Trump's Republican Party will come to you, telling you they can repair the damage he's done. They'll beg you to forget their votes to exonerate Trump from his crimes, ask you to forgive their silence, their cowardice, and their betrayals as Trump wrecked this nation.
Then almost on cue, Lindsey Graham, Lindsey Graham, who said that Donald Trump was a kook, he was a racist, and now he's Donald Trump's golfing buddy. Today, he tweeted Donald Trump should pardon Roger Stone. That would be okay with him as chair of the Judiciary Committee because he's a man in his 70s, a nonviolent first-time offense. Of course, that doesn't apply to the thousands of others of federal prisoners who fit in that category because there's no difference between Lindsey Graham and Donald Trump and Roger Stone. It's all the same. And for more on the broken, irredeemable Republican Party, I'm joined now by former Republican strategist Steve Schmidt. Steve, this news of Roger Stone's commutation strikes me as the most perfect embodiment of the thesis here, that the rot here is total and complete.
Well, Chris, you used the word irredeemable, and that's the correct word. The party is irredeemable. It's become a threat to America's institutions, to small L liberalism. It is an authoritarian-ish party, not so different than the parties that we see in Hungary or Poland. It's no longer fidelitous to the American system, to the American Constitution. Really what it is an organized conspiracy to maintain power. Now, the good news is tonight, when you look out across the Senate races, Joni Ernst in Iowa has fallen behind. The Cory Gardner race in Colorado is effectively over. Martha McSally is almost certain to lose. And when you talk about the aforementioned Lindsey Graham in South Carolina, he's running against a Democratic challenger, a Black American, Jamie Harrison. And Jamie Harrison has a real chance to win in South Carolina because voters understand what a fraud Lindsey Graham is, that he's played them for fools for many, many years, and that people, generally speaking, in this country don't like it when their politicians take them for fools, look them in the eye and lie to them the way that Lindsey Graham has. They don't appreciate his betrayal of his former best friend, his embrace of his new best friend. And so wherever we look, we see a party that has been an agent, that has been collaborationist along with Donald Trump in wreaking the damage that we've seen in this country. And again, we are the epicenter of coronavirus death and suffering. We'll have 200,000 dead Americans by the time we make it to the election. We have a shattered economy with 40 million Americans out of work. We see the wholesale corruption of the loan process where so many small businesses couldn't access the money, but so many cronies of President Trump could. And again, we've seen just for years now this assault on our institutions, on government employees like Fiona Hill, on our service members. And lastly, Chris, if I could just say, how dare Josh Hawley put his letter out there talking about the United States military when he's yet to say a word about a president of the United States who's left the military defenseless as the Russian president puts bounties on their head. It's truly a despicable moment. These parties are two of the great institutions in the history of the country and in the world for the advancement of human freedom and dignity, and the collapse of the Republican Party, its putrefaction, its descent into the cesspool is a real tragedy for the country, and we see it playing out now every day.
You know, this. You mentioned the politics at the beginning of this, and I'm so struck by this moment. You know, so Roger Stone's been pardoned. No one in their right mind who is a political advisor to the president of any ideological stripe, I think, would advise him to do this right now. I mean, the politics of it are terrible, but the logic here, I mean, the president's going to do whatever he wants, and he doesn't like people that snitched, and the guy kept quiet for him, which is what Stone articulated. But there's also this logic of, like, jumping everyone into the gang. Like, everybody increasingly has to say absurd things, and they have to countenance increasingly terrible and sort of antisocial behavior from the president, because then they're stuck to him. So now they're all going to go out and say, oh, it's fine that Roger Stone was pardoned for what he did. And it'll be another sort of like tightening of the loyalty oath that has bound everyone to the president.
This is a cult of personality, and we should treat it as such. And I'm reminded of the great phrase by the late, great Democratic Senator Daniel Patrick Moynihan, who talked about defining deviancy down. And we've seen years now in the Republican Party of defining deviancy down, is that these senators will explicate Donald Trump on any issue. We saw Joni Ernst last week being asked a question about how Donald Trump is doing on the coronavirus response. And her absurd answer was, I think the president is stepping forward, intimating that he's somehow doing a good job. And of course, it's all theater of the absurd. None of this stuff is possibly justified. His conduct is abhorrent. He's desecrated his office. But more than that, he's literally, without exception, he's the worst leader in the history of the United States in a moment of crisis who was ever charged with any responsibility. And for all of these years, there's no action by Trump that any of these senators can find it in their hearts to condemn. What they're outraged about is that they've all bought their ticket and they're about to take the ride from groups like the Lincoln Project that have spent a lot of money telling the truth on them and their records to their voters. And they're outraged about that. They finally summoned their outrage.
It's also just striking to me, I mean, to watch Josh Hawley and Ted Cruz in particular. I mean, look at these two people. They have, they have sterling resumes. They are both Supreme Court clerks, right? One of the sort of most sought after brass rings that you can grab as sort of a young and promising legal thinker. They're relatively young as senators. There's a once-in-a-century challenge. There are morgues that are filling up in Texas. They're going to hit hospital capacity. There's record cases in Missouri. These guys are out there talking about the Goya boycott and the NBA in China and Lawrence Tribe's tone. I mean, it's like, go be a blogger, go start a podcast, get out of the U.S. Senate if that's what you want to talk about. There is serious things to be done.
I think there's no premise more offensive than that these Republican senators are somehow hostages to the Trump regime and to Donald Trump. They're vested with significant constitutional power, significant institutional power. And in the case of Hawley and Cruz, not only are they demagogues and silly people, they're just empty vessels. Again, they're the type of soulless men and women we see in this terrible age that care nothing for the ideas and ideals of the country. What they care about is their privilege, their power, their position. They would be comfortable as apparatchiks in any authoritarian regime from time immemorial to forward. They're not in it to defend any high principle. They're not in it to advance any great cause. They're not in it to make the country better. They're small and silly men at a serious hour. And that's the crisis we have in the country. It's a crisis of unseriousness. It's a crisis of cowardice. We're a long way from the Dean Achesons and the Rusks and the Margaret Chase Smiths, men and women of conviction and character. Think of the guts and the courage of a Rosa Parks compared to these people who are actually vested with political leadership and responsibility in this country. It's just an appalling, appalling moment. And hopefully, as the tide rises up, because we have about 33% of the country that approves of the president's conduct, roughly 65, 70% of us are get him out of there, because the country has no chance of recovering from any of this until he's removed from power. But the overwhelming majority of Americans, their rage and their anger is rising like a righteous tide. It's going to sweep all of these people out of office. And when we're sitting in November, the Republican Party is going to be more resembling a smoldering ash heap than a political party, and everyone will sit around scratching their heads. And how did this happen? It happened because it became a principleless, authoritarian-ish party headed by a con man from New York City who has debased, desecrated, and defaced our institutions now for years, and the American people are going to fire him because of it.
One of the hallmarks of this scandal-ridden time in our national life, one of the hallmarks of this unprecedentedly scandal-ridden presidency is, unfortunately, that very serious things, very shocking things even, tend to just pass by. Right? Even the most serious things, they just pass by. I mean, the president's campaign chairman was sent to prison. The president's deputy campaign chairman was also sent to prison. The president's self-named charity was shut down as an ongoing criminal enterprise, and his children are henceforth restricted by law from even being associated with charities. The president's self-named fake university was shut down as a scam as well, and he had to pay $25 million to settle fraud claims against it. And, you know, it's easy to forget, but the president was also impeached. And yes, then the president retaliated against all of the witnesses who testified in his impeachment hearings. The president personally intervened to change the FBI's plans for its new headquarters building in a way that would benefit his own downtown Washington, D.C. hotel. The president's sister had to resign as a federal judge to avoid an ethics inquiry into alleged fraud and tax evasion schemes that she and the president benefited from in terms of the family fortune they both inherited. She gave up her lifetime appointment as a judge so that would not be looked at. The president's cabinet secretaries and high-level appointees, you know, national security advisors, defense secretaries, White House chiefs of staff, White House communications directors, hand-picked senior advisors. They've all basically run screaming from the White House, warning publicly about how dangerously unfit he is to be anywhere near the office of the presidency. All his own hand-picked people. Even now, he is still randomly promoting a supposed miracle cure for coronavirus, literally telling Americans they should take the drug, and he is too. The drug is both disproven as a cure or a preventative for coronavirus, and, oh, by the way, it kills some people. Those endorsements of his miracle cure were both before and after he suggested that maybe Americans should ingest disinfectants to clean out the virus from inside our bodies. I mean, this is the president who put the guy who gave Jeffrey Epstein his get-out-of-jail-free card in the cabinet. Remember Alex Acosta? Remember what he had to resign over? Yeah. This is the president who put his son's wedding planner in charge of federal housing in the northeastern United States. I mean, just in the past couple of weeks, we learned this president was told that Russia was paying cash bounties for the killing of American soldiers. He was told that and did nothing about it at all. He was offered a menu of possible acts of retaliation against Russia for them doing that. He chose, on this menu, I'll take nothing. I will do nothing. I mean, these things they just pass by. I mean, it's quite literally hard to keep track of them. It's my job to keep track of them. It's hard to keep track of them. I mean, this is the president who pressured the post office to go after Amazon because he doesn't like the way the newspaper owned by the Amazon guy covers him and his presidency. This is the president who fired an inspector general, among many he fired. He fired one inspector general who was investigating the Secretary of State and his wife, and he fired that inspector general because the Secretary of State asked him to. Sure, of course, that's kosher. This is the president who tried to get the G7 meeting held at his own golf club in Florida. This is the president who advertised his wife's jewelry line on the White House website, complete with the trademark note. This president apparently believes that Frederick Douglass is still alive and that the statue of a random Bronco rider in his office is Teddy Roosevelt. This is the president who randomly took a surprise urgent emergency trip to Walter Reed Military Hospital and won't say what for. This president changed a hurricane forecast into one he liked better than the real one and then made the National Weather Service say they agreed with his made-up version. I mean, where do you begin? These things, like, just pick a week. Pick a week that he's been in office or running for office. Throw a dart. You can name something like this, right? Along these lines. I mean, any individual one of these things would be among the biggest scandals, if not the biggest scandal, to ever afflict any other presidency. But by virtue of the sheer number of scandals that surround him like flies around Pigpen, these have just become part of what we expect, right? We have a little momentary shock and a short period of interest with each new low blow, but then we just wait for the next one. And they all just pass by. And the most common reason they get pushed off the front page is because another newer scandal comes along to squeeze them out. It's exhausting and enervating and bizarre and occasionally hilarious and terrifying in terms of what remains of the norms and mores of our country and what we're going to rely on to prosecute corruption in the future when he's gotten away with this much.